Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the CRISP DM process and how it can be applied to professional sports for individual personal use and also how it's used in the industry. So to start off with, let's just talk a little bit about what CRISP DM is. Essentially, it's the iterative process that you run through when you're working on a data project. So, just as a quick reminder, first we have our business understanding. When we're doing that, we really want to pinpoint what our problem to solve is. And then we're going to go into data understanding, where we collect and explore high quality data. And then we move to data preparation, where we select, clean, and format the collected data. So these are the three that we're going to focus on today for our first example. Um, the data understanding and business understanding, we're going to run through real quick, and then we're going to spend a lot of time in data preparation today. And then the next step is modeling, where we can determine and implement modeling techniques that we want to use to understand the data more clearly. And then we're going to talk about evaluation and deployment. And in this section, we're going to pull real life examples from online about how you can use that data both personally and how it's used by the league and in the sports industry. So we're going to get started off with our business understanding. We want to know the problem that we want to solve. So for the purpose of this example, we're just going to say like you just joined a fantasy league or your friends have talked you into doing this sports betting stuff now since it's legal in Ohio, but you've never actually watched a sport before. You have no idea what's going on. You don't know what any of the statistics mean. So you want to just kind of dive in mathematically and see what you can do with the information provided and figure out who you should put your money on, who you should draft into your fantasy team. So we know that we want to become more familiar with sports statistics. That's just kind of our huge base. This is where we want to start. But that's really broad. So you know that your friends are like huge Blue Jackets fans. You know that they've already got season tickets. You're probably going to end up getting taken to a couple of games. So you're going to just kind of focus on the Blue Jackets for now because that's where your most interaction is going to be. But that's still a ton of information out there on them, and you just kind of like don't even know where to start with that. So let's just like pick a statistic that we're going to focus on, and we'll go for that for now. And then, kind of maybe as the season goes on, you'll figure out a little bit more about what's happening. So let's just decide that we're going to choose goals, like who has made the most the most who has made the most goals, who has the potential to make the most goals going forward, and what would that look like, so that you can decide who you want to draft for your team or who you want to put money on rather than focusing on the team as a whole or anything more complicated like shot percentages or anything like that. Just focus on who has the most goals. So now we're going to go into our data understanding section where we're going to find some high quality data. We're going to review it, make sure it looks okay before we get into preparing it. So the first step is to collect data. And I found this hockeyreference.com. There's also a link here to the data set that I used. It is an open data resource, and the information is collected directly from the NHL. It's just a little easier to see it by team, and by historical data as well. They collect the data and they put it in for whatever years they were with this team. Whereas if you went to the NHL website and you pulled up like the Blue Jackets statistics, it's only going to show you current statistics for players on the team right now. Whereas if you're looking at this, you can see how people have previously performed on the team, um, before they got traded or retired or something like that. Then we're going to go into our data exploration. We're going to take a quick look at the data set, perform some exploratory assessments, make sure that everything looks like it's meets that kind of data quality checklist, we are going to use Power Query for that. That is built into Microsoft Excel, Power BI, and I've used Excel for this project because the data set's relatively small. It's like just over 300 rows. Um, and we're going to just confirm, like I said, that the data set meets our expectations for data quality. Now, our expectations might be a little bit lower than the expectations, say, that a coach might use for um, analyzing the player's performance, because we just want to know, should I put $2 on this guy? Should I draft him for my fantasy league? We're not really expecting to do any serious player analysis for ours. So, like I said, we're going to use Power Query for this, and when you open up Excel, you can go into the Data tab right here, and then select From Web. And when you do that, it pulls up a little pop-up so you can put your URL in. And I really like this because it keeps our data coming directly from the source and it keeps it refreshed. When you go into this later, say you need to work on it again or you want to check next week's scores, you can just refresh your data. You don't have to go back to the website and reload data, download a CSV, upload a CSV, any of that kind of stuff. It comes directly from the web. So then it's going to open up into this Power Query editor, which is what you see right here. Down here, this is what this data looks like on the website. So you can see here this data is not super clean. We've got no column headers, and we've got here where the scoring is kind of lumped together. And we can see here we've got scoring, scoring, scoring here in these column headers, and then our actual column headers are kind of the second row. And this is where you can view all of your data. Over here on the right hand side is our applied steps. So this is where we can keep track of what changes we've made. We can go back and adjust changes. We can undo changes, all of that fun stuff. Over here is where you can see our data sources. So you have, if you chose to do this and maybe you had another team as well, you could pull in a second data site over here and you could merge them, append them, whatever you needed to do. And then we just have some tools up here that we can use while we're going through this process, and I'll mention a few of them going through this. So for our data understanding, kind of data quality checklist, you can see we're looking for completeness. So does the data contain the desired records and features and there are no missing values? So we can come over here and at the top of each column, you see the distribution. You've also got where you see errors and empty fields. And I really like this because I don't have to go through and like build my own histogram or like search through editing whether there's empty and error fields. It's just right there. It's ready for you. It's part of what's built in. And then when you click on a column, and you can check mark the column statistics button in the fields at the top, you get these statistics right here for each column. So you can see how many rows there are. Again, you've got your errors and empties, distincts and uniques, so you can see whether there's any duplicates in there. Your not in numbers, how many are 0, and then you've got your average and standard deviation as well. And I really like how Power Query lays that out because it really is just kind of like an at a glance. You don't have to do a lot of work to get to that point. It just kind of shows up when you use Power Query Editor. So for our completeness, we don't have any errors, empties, not in numbers in fields that we would expect there to be none. So we have, for example, the player name. There are no empty fields in there. There are, as we go further down the data set and into some of the calculations, some zeros, some nulls, some things that need to be addressed. But those aren't things that we're considering missing data right now. Those are things that we're going to actually deal with later. As far as timeliness for this one, just like I said before, this does actually come straight from the website, and that website that I talked about refreshes weekly with the new information. So we do have up-to-date information We just need to go into Power Query and hit refresh when we reopen our fields. Um, and that's a little more complicated. It's not dynamic. It doesn't update automatically. You do have to go hit refresh, but it is better than just having a static source of data where, for example, you just copy pasted it in. Validity, are there reasonable values in the data set? Yes, nothing is saying that somebody has 700 shots on goal. Um, Everything seems reasonable for the team, for hockey in general. Everything kind of makes sense. Consistency, this data, even though it is a secondary source, you can verify it against the NHL data on the Blue Jackets website, and it does match through there, so you don't have any issues with consistency. And is it consistent within the data set? Yes, there's nothing that shows any red flags, any concerns about integrity. Everything appears to be kind of as you would expect it to be for this kind of data. So now that we have our data, we have a good understanding of it, we have an idea that it's pretty high quality data, even if it's not super informative, we're trying to keep it simple anyway. So we're going to move into our data preparation, and I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the steps that I took in Power Query to make those changes and what the data is going to look like on the far end of that and how we've got it all cleaned up and nice and pretty looking. So just kind of as I skimmed through the first things, I noticed that we definitely needed to work with on this one are those headers and duplicate rows. They just kind of need cleaned up a little bit. They need to make a little more sense to me as, again, for the example, a beginner. We're going to rename some of those headers and features so that they make a little more sense. And we've got to figure out what's going on with those missing and error values in some of those fields. So right here, I've got, remember on the right hand side of that Power Query editor, the applied steps. So these are all of my applied steps, and we're going to run through those just through the next few slides. So here, the first thing that I wanted to do was to fix the headers and the duplicates. So again, this is the data that you see as it appears on the website. We've got right here this weird like extra header line that's breaking stuff into groups, which is great for grouping. And then we have these are all named with just abbreviations, and that's great if you know what you're talking about. But if you don't, you might want to reset that. And then if you look here, I just put a little break in, but after each 20th row, it resets the headers. And that's, again, really great when you're scrolling through the website and you want to keep, an eye on what everything is, and you've scrolled past this top header row. But for our data, then when it pulls into Power Query, this shows as an additional row. So we're going to remove duplicate rows. That way we are not having this extra row in here. But when you use remove duplicates in Power Query, it's lovely because it does leave the top one and it gives you the selection option for what you want to leave. So we left this top one in and we've removed these extra ones that are periodically throughout our data set with this remove duplicates option. And then I removed the top row because I don't really feel like we need this, and I'm going to rename these columns anyway to make them easier to understand. So we just kind of pulled out the scoring, goals, and assists, ice time. We don't need that extra information. And then I promoted headers, and what promoted headers does, it's just like when you make a table in Excel and you say top row is headers, that's essentially what we've done. So we've made this rank. After we remove this, we mark the first row, which is this row now. So rank, player, from 2 years, all of this is now going to be the headers in our data. So as you can see, we've gone from this to this, and we've renamed the different types of scoring so that it matches what was on the first one, but we don't have to kind of try to translate what all of these abbreviations mean, and we don't have this double row of headers anymore. The other thing that's done at this step is I changed the type. So on some of these we had text showing as numbers, numbers showing as text, and it's really easy in Power Query to fix that. When you go to the column header, you see this 1, 2, 3. That means this is in here as a value. And you can click on this and it just pulls up a list, and you can select ABC for text, and there's a handful of other options. Pretty much with this, we've done all either ABC or 1, 2, 3. We have text and numerical data in this data set. So one that really stood out was the rank for each player is, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then their names listed. That's not really a numerical number. We're not going to be performing calculations with that. It doesn't have any meaning as a number. It is truly just categorical. So I just reframed that as text for my purposes so that I could just keep in mind that that's not actually a number, and then I'm not going to accidentally try to calculate something. It'll give me an error if I put that column number in instead. Like I said, I renamed these columns and I made some readability changes. This split column by delimiter, I personally like names to be split if at all possible, first, last. And I like the last name to be listed first. I work in banking and I have for like almost 10 years, and that's just kind of how it always is. So it's what I'm used to. So that's just kind of a personal preference. It's not really something that you have to do, but I split those columns by last name and then first, middle, and rearranged them so that the last name was first in the data set. Again, that's just kind of for me. You don't have to do that, but it's just kind of an example of how you can really make the data set work for you, how you can use Power Query to make things make sense the way you want it to. So kind of our next step with that data preparation is to handle our missing values. So when you're looking at the summary at the top of each column, you can see that in our shooting percentage, we have 3% that are empty values. So I kind of went back to our original data set and I was like, what's going on here? Well, when you review the shooting percentage data set, shooting percentage is how many goals they've made versus how many shots on goal they've attempted. So when you have a player who has not attempted any shots on goal, maybe say their defense and never had an opportunity, their goalie, it's not expected of them, those are showing as an empty field or as a 0. But then, of course, when you're calculating a shooting percentage divided by that shots on goal, you can't divide by 0. So we have these empty errors that are in that calculated field. So what I did is I went ahead and just used the replace value function and just reset all of those as 0. Because yes, we can't divide by 0 by doing goals divided by shots on goal, but if they don't have any shots on goal, then they obviously don't have any goals. So it's a very reasonable imputation to go ahead and just replace those and make it a 0. So now that we've done all of those steps and you hit save and load in your Power Query editor, this is what it looks like when we get back to Excel. So you see we've got a much cleaner looking data set. We have all of our columns up here. They kind of make a little more sense than what we saw on the website. We've got our rank, which is categorical, last name, first name, sorted alphabetically because that's just how I am as a person. We have our from, our to. I renamed years to career length because this is how long they were with the Blue Jackets, not necessarily how long they've been playing altogether, but it did make a little more sense in the context of how I wanted to use the data. How many games they've played, goals, assists, points, their plus minus, penalties in minutes, even strength goals, how long they're on the ice. The time on ice is total, and then average time on ice is like minutes at a time. So this is a much cleaner data set. It'll be a lot easier to work with when we get into actually analyzing this data And I really like that when it comes out of Power Query, it is automatically in a table format, and it is formatted to show the every other line shading just for ease of reading. I didn't set this setting. It came this way when I hit save and load out of Power Query Editor. So it's just another perk that I really like about it. So we've done all of the business understanding, data preparation steps in our CRISP DM process. And now we're going to look at a couple examples of modeling, evaluation, and deployment. And I, just full disclosure going forward, the next steps that we've done are not models or understandings that I've done myself. These are things that I found online. So there are links and sources as we go through the next few slides through the QR codes on the slides. So this is a really nice model that I found on Tableau Public. This is expected points versus actual points. So this is a way that you can take all of the data that we just talked about, and I'm sure that there's more information in this particular data set. And you can kind of take a player and you can see, well, here is their expected points, and are they performing above or below their expected? So like this Patrick Lane up here, if you look him up, all-star, superstar, fantastic player, you would expect him to be way up here. But then if you come down here and you look at Kevin Stenlund, he didn't play with the Blue Jackets for very long. He only played 3 games with the Blue Jackets, 3 or 4. So it's not surprising that he's down here below the expected scoring because he wasn't on the ice a lot. And then you can kind of see, like, you've got Cole Sillinger, who's still playing for the Jackets, and Yegor Chinakhov. They're kind of middling, pretty close to where they're expected to be at. They're playing pretty well. And this can kind of give you an idea of where you would want to put that money, who you would want to draft on your team. This, of course, is old data. This is from a couple of years ago. I didn't have any current because the season just started. But this is just an example of how you could use that information. Now, kind of the final step, we've taken a look at some models, we've cleaned everything up. Now we need to evaluate and deploy that information. So we're going to talk about how the NHL actually is using this information. In addition to, like we've talked about, using it for fantasy, using it for sports betting, getting an idea of who the best players are, who the highest scoring players are. But let's talk about how it's used kind of IRL, like in real life. How is this being applied to the sports industry? So for some of these real world examples, I really liked this article, The Impact of Analytics on Modern Ice Hockey. It's actually published on the Pittsburgh Penguins website, and they kind of go through just some of these bullet points about how data analytics is used in the game. And I'm just going to kind of summarize that for us real quick. So we've got this player performance analysis. So essentially, you can analyze your players and the opposing team's players, and you can see, who's best to put on the ice at what time, who you want to maybe sit out, who you want against a particular person on the other team. You can see who on the other team has been playing well and who has been playing badly. And you can do that all in kind of your preparation, your lead up for the game as you're planning for the upcoming game. But you can also do that in real time. You can make decisions about, who you want to be on the ice during a power play, and how you want to counter defense strategy that's being played against you at that point in time. It can also be used for enhanced training and development. So you can take a look at your own players and you can say, what are your weak points statistically and how can we improve those? And in addition to looking at the individual players' statistics and what they need to improve, you can also take a look at improvement techniques and how those techniques are performing, whether, if you've got them in the gym an extra hour, is that actually working? Or do you need to adjust the way that you're doing that training? What I think the most obvious use for data analytics is this coaching and scouting. Coaches and scouts can see who's coming up from high school, college, minor leagues, and take a look at who's performing the best, who they want to draft, who they want to sign deals. It can also affect, how much money these deals are, where you end up playing, and it can also analyze the compatibility with the team. You may be a really high scorer, but that may not matter if that's not what the team is looking for, what the team needs. So these are some kind of real life applications, how this is actually being used, in addition to those kind of more fun individual uses like the fantasy leagues or sports betting and that kind of stuff. So I am going to leave you guys today with just a couple of other things that you might want to think about going forward with this technique, this process, how you might use it for other things, how you might expand on it. So the first thing to kind of think about is what additional informations could affect player performance. Things like injuries, height and weight, how long they've been playing, other teams that they've played for, and just kind of really want you guys to think about where would you go looking for that kind of information? How would you incorporate it into your data set? What would be the best way to combine that information with the data set that we have? Maybe you need to find a completely different data set. And what other things might you want to look for when you're truly trying to find an analysis of what you would consider the best player? And then just kind of what other topics or projects could the data cleaning process that we went over today be applied to? Is it something where maybe you're not really into hockey? You could take this and use it for the NFL team. That you now, granted, there's a lot of different statistics for sports players on football because they have like teams of hundreds of people. But maybe you want to take that and you want to take some of the information from that previous question and put together something a little more complicated for an NFL team. Could you use that same process for other things outside of sports? Maybe you are trying to start selling little crafts on the side. You want to analyze, what's selling the best in your area, and you look up that kind of information online and you pull it in to a similar data cleaning set. So I just kind of want to leave you guys with these open-ended thoughts, things that you might just want to consider, think about how you might want to use that. And if you guys have any questions or if you want to talk about any of this stuff or discuss down in the comments, just let me know.